This is a story where darkness reigns and secrets lurk in every shadow. It's a crazy story, but I promise you it is 100% true. Susan Young Walsh was an investigative journalist in New York City. She grew up in New Jersey and had a dream to become a writer, but she also struggled with a troubled childhood that made reaching her goals a constant struggle. She attended William Patterson University in New Jersey, and she often worked as an exotic dancer. Now, by the time she was in her 20s, she was struggling with alcoholism and she was addicted to drugs. She had also been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. Now, fast forward to 1984, and by 1989, she had been sober for 4 years. She had gotten married to Mark Walsh, which is the brother of Joe Walsh from the group The Eagles, and she gave birth to their son, David. Susan had an interest in the darker side of life, and that made her an effective investigator, but it also may have led to her downfall. While she was interning for a newspaper called The Village Voice, she heard an extremely disturbing rumor from fellow journalists. Hospitals in New York were suffering from an unusual and frightening phenomenon. Blood was disappearing from the hospitals. Susan's boss at the Village Voice was James Ridgway, and he suggested that she investigate the strange thefts because they were working on a story for Halloween. So after she spent weeks cross-referencing tips with various contacts from all around the East Village, she went back to her boss with an explanation that seemed as ridiculous as it was unbelievable. Susan claimed that vampires were to blame for the hospital's stolen blood. This may seem crazy, but stick with me. Okay, so a small coven of vampires that were initially content to just drink each other's blood in dark occult rituals that took place at night had begun stealing it from the city's hospitals. Because of this information, he was concerned that she had relapsed. He couldn't think of any other reason that she would say this. How could she have come up with such a bizarre theory when there had to be a more rational conclusion, he thought. He asked Susan to rewrite the article and to reconsider her theories, but she was insistent that she was onto something and that she promised that she would explain her theories better in a later article. This is what she found. The first vampire that she met was named Vlad. He told her that cities were a good place for vampires because if you get hungry, there are a lot of willing victims. He talked about how he drank blood from his friends' cuts when he was young and that he liked the sweet taste. On Washington and West 14th Streets in New York City's meatpacking district, there was a club called Mother, and once a month on a Wednesday night, the club's owners, along with the Sabretooth clan, threw an event that was known as Long Black Veil, or LBV. Now, Sabretooth makes fangs, among other vampire-related things, and the owner goes by the name Father Sebastian. The original Vampire Code of Ethics was introduced at the LBV. This code is accepted worldwide and is the standard code of vampire culture. However, not all vampires follow it because they don't see it as necessary. At the Long Black Veil, the dress code was dark fetish, goth, Edwardian, vampire, rubber, or Victorian. Some of their events included the annual Lost Boys Beach Party and the Bloodletters Valentine's Ball. Susan began to find that the deeper she dug into the city's underground vampire scene, the more dark and disturbing it became. The seductive allure of the vampire can be very strong to those with an interest in the lives of the immortal, and Susan definitely had an interest. A journalist that she knew put her in touch with a woman who owned a shop in the East Village, and she sold glazed skulls and old clothes, occult books, handmade capes, and coffin-shaped jewelry. Susan said the woman descended the staircase of an abandoned basement theater that smelled heavy of incense, and the decor was jet black. There she met the Reverend Lady Armida H.P., a.k.a. Armida Barth, a.k.a. the Witch of the East Village. Now, H.P. stands for High Priestess. She was a ceremonial magician that casted spells and was an ordained druid. She also was the owner of 2 occult stores called Lady in the Moon and Camelot. She was entrusted to the Vampire Club to provide them with blood vials and ceremonial knives that were used for breaking the skin of those that they were about to feed on. Now, Susan was told that she was wasting her time looking for members of the Vampire Club during the daytime, and that although they were obviously not the immortal, morph into a bat kind of vampires, they were just as dangerous. Susan began to feel queasy as she was told these things, and that they would actually off people to get their blood fixed. They even had contacts in hospitals around the city that could get fresh blood for them for a price. The Witch of the East Village put Susan in contact with a man that claimed to have ties to the Vampire Club, and his name is Father Sebastian. Father Sebastian ran a vampire networking service called Sabretooth's Vampire Event Line, and it would put people in touch with the club, but only after they were thoroughly vetted. Now, he told Susan about the different types of vampires. He told her about fashion vampires who simply wore gothic clothing while listening to dark music, but that there were also real vampires, and transcending into one was a long and difficult process. When she asked him about the culture of drinking blood, he told her that he had tried it a few times, but in a deadly serious tone, he told her that it was an overwhelming sensation, almost like taking ecstasy. He described it as very sensual. He said that it was like a very special kind of wine, one that you can sip and taste a person's lifestyle in their blood, how old they were, or what their ethnicity was. The Vampire Club was very serious, and members were tested for HIV about once a month. He told her that some of the members of that Vampire Club were a Catholic priest, 2 pastors, and some lawyers, one of the top executives in Citibank. There were politicians, as well as people who simply had a fetish for blood. He also confirmed that the club did indeed have a contact that worked in a medical facility. He said they would meet at a secretive location every few weeks to conduct a feeding ritual. One week, they may meet in the private dining area of an Italian restaurant that was owned by someone that was sympathetic to them, or someone who would keep quiet for the right price. Vampires are grouped according to what they use as their food or their energy source. Not all vampires drink blood, although that is the most common. Sanguine vampires believe that they actually need to drink a small amount of human blood to survive or balance their emotional, physical, and spiritual health. There were the transcended vampires. They were the leaders of the club, and they would have people who would organize and facilitate the feedings. There was also what's known as the herd, those who consented to be bitten. They were the ones who climbed the ranks of the club in the hopes of one day becoming a fully fledged vampire. He told her stories of a much darker scene that existed where he had witnessed some very disturbing things. He told her that he had once attended what was known as a sanctuary feed. He saw a young woman who was unconscious and strapped to a table, and she had tubes coming out of her arms. Those that were in attendance could feed off of her, but Father Sebastian said he didn't have any idea of what became of the girl, and because it was too much for him at the time, he left before the feeding was complete. Every pleasure you taste has its price. The Vampire Club wasn't the only thing that Susan was investigating. She was also investigating a story about exotic dancers and ladies of the night being trafficked from the former Soviet Union, where they were forced to pay off their debts to those that helped them illegally get into the United States. She used her connections in the clubs to organize secret meetings with many of the girls who worked in those clubs, and she met several people who claimed to be the agents or managers of the dancers that she was interviewing. 2 of the agents threatened that if she didn't stop publishing what she had learned, she would regret it. Dancers were sometimes used as bait in mafia deals, so not only did she just learn about a vampire club, now she's terrified that the mafia is going to get her. Okay, so in June of 1996, a month before she disappeared, Susan was a researcher for a book about the industry, but the night of the publisher's party, James, her boss, noticed that Susan's wrists were bandaged. He learned that along with she had also started drinking again. When questioned, she just brushed it off and said that she would get help if she thought that she needed it. And at the time, Susan had been sober for 11 years. She had also developed an eating disorder and began taking Xanax mixed with alcohol, which can cause delusions and hallucinations. Then she stopped taking her lithium. So one day, Ridgway says that she just collapsed in the street. He paid for her to see a psychologist because she was getting worse and worse. But she was also dancing at this time. And during a documentary that was made by her friend Jill Morley, she talked about the toll that dancing had taken on her life and how she was struggling to even hang on. She told Jill she had bronchitis, emphysema, and an ulcer. She had been to the hospital twice that week, and she was having mood swings and was depressed. Susan once said that I lie on the dressing room stools, staring up at the ceiling, running images through my mind. Me taking a blade to a man's private area and slicing it up like a cucumber for salad. The career that she used to enjoy became exploitative, cruel, and manipulative. And this is one of the reasons that she wanted to expose human trafficking rings so badly. She once saw men's smiles as her payment, and the dollar bills that they stuffed between her, were just extras. Now here is what we know about the days that led up to her disappearance. Susan's last phone call with her half-brother, Arthur, was described as very weird. He said that she was out of it and that she was distracted. Their conversation was like two different ones. He said 1 minute she was talking about a trip to Las Vegas and how she was helping a government agency with a case, and then she would switch it up and talk about she wanted to watch Roseanne and that she would call him back. So their conversation would pick up about 30 minutes later, but he said it was just as confusing and disjointed as the first. Friends and colleagues began to notice around this time that her pager, it just kept going off. It wasn't just once or twice a day with messages regarding work, but every couple of minutes sometimes.
I had been working for 6 years as a writer for engineering and business publications after college and raising a son pretty much on my own. I was separated and I lost my job because of the recession, and I said, wow, how can I raise my son, go to graduate school, and take my writing out of the trade sector into the public sector and still do it all and not just have time to make dinner and go to sleep every night. And I thought it was an easy way out, because I had a friend who was making thousands a week. She said to me, why don't you dance a couple nights a week and then you can do whatever you want, raise your kid, go to school. I said, great. At first I felt totally in control, lots of attention, men love me, I'm getting attention, I'm the little princess on stage. It's insidious, and after a while I realized that it was exhausting. There were many hidden costs, and I stayed in it for far too many years, and I'm not happy with the fact that I am still dancing. Yes, I did complete half of my master's, and I have been doing a lot of writing, but boy, what a high price I had to pay.
Just lost 11 and a half years of sobriety because of dancing. But I'm faced with the problem now where I would get a regular job right now because I'm so scared of what it's done to me. And yet, I've stayed in it so long that my health is so bad that I'd be calling in sick every other day. I know. That's my beeper. Oh, it's probably a stalker right now. I do have a stalker.
Susan told her father and some of her closest friends that she was extremely worried because she believed that 2 contracts had been issued for her death. And her father said she was coming apart at the seams. On July the 14th in 1996, her pager went off during an interview that she was conducting regarding the trafficking. Now, 2 days later, she left her apartment to run some errands and to make a phone call from a payphone across the street. Susan had a live-in boyfriend at the time, and he said that minutes before she disappeared, she was acting strangely. She left behind her purse, wallet, keys, her medicine, and her pager. She and her ex-husband lived in the same apartment building, so she would use his phone sometimes, but he wouldn't let her use it if he didn't approve of why she wanted to use it. She was going to call her agent that booked her jobs as a go-go dancer. He didn't want her to use it for that. So according to police, there is no record of any outgoing calls made from payphones near her apartment the morning that she disappeared. She was seen walking towards the payphones, but no one saw her actually make a call. When police asked if they could conduct forensic tests in Mark's apartment, he refused because of advice from his lawyer. His lawyer believed that the search would make him the main suspect because Susan's hair and her fingerprints would simply just be all over his home. Mark said he didn't see Susan leave the apartment. Another thing, the page for the entire month of July was missing from her wall calendar. Al Sullivan was the editor of the William Patterson University newspaper that she wrote for in college, and he was interviewed after Susan disappeared. He mentioned how Susan's charisma was so addictive and that she had always been popular with men. Even though she had divorced her husband, Mark, he couldn't bring himself to move away from her, and so he moved into the basement apartment below her as a way to be near her. Plus, it also made it easier for them to raise their 11-year-old son, David, together. Al Sullivan said people don't stop falling in love with her. Her boyfriends wouldn't even leave her alone. Okay, now back to the vampires. When Susan disappeared, a local television station came and interviewed Lady Armida about her customers. She said, "You're wasting your time looking for them during the day. They work at night. Some of them work in the hospitals, conveniently." She paused and she said, "They do kill people, you know." She said, "I think Susan got done in by a degenerated man. I'm working on trying to find out where she's stashed." Now, the vampire Vlad believed that Susan was in hiding, or that she had taken her life, or that she was in an institution. During the time that Susan was in New York, it was around the same time as the historic Vampire Ball at the Limelight in July of 1996. Also, when she appeared, New York City had the largest Dracula fan club in the world with over 5,000 members. There was also a vampire museum, a 22-year-old vampire research center, and even an after-midnight cable talk show for those that were interested in vampires and vampire culture. A few members of the vampire community assured author Catherine Ramsland, who was working on a book about Susan's disappearance, that they knew Susan and had spoken with her frequently, but that they were innocent of anything related to her disappearance. Catherine Ramsland was also Anne Rice's biographer. The Nutley Police Department, they didn't rule out vampires, but Susan's parents, her friends, her editors, and the vampires themselves did. She had a friend named Melissa Hines. Now, Melissa said that she saw Susan getting into a limo about a month after she disappeared. Melissa gave the license plate number to police, and they were able to track the vehicle down. The owner told police that he had been with a woman that fit Susan Walsh's description. They showed him photos of Susan, but he wasn't 100% certain that it was her, so they could not positively determine that it had been her that got into the limousine. Before Susan vanished, she and Melissa were followed several times. Her father, his name is Floyd, he believed that it was the mob that was after her. He said that people in organized crime were concerned that Susan had information that could send them to jail. Here are some updates. Sonar equipment was used to search for her body in a reservoir behind Mark Walsh's father's house, and Susan used to walk there a lot. Now, Christian Peppo, he dated Susan and he lived with her, and he too alleged that she was being stalked and harassed by this crazy ex-boyfriend named Billy Walker. He said the cops never did anything to even protect Susan from Billy. And he alleged that Walsh had a tape of Billy actually threatening her life. It was said that he was in the Italian mafia. As his stalking escalated, Susan reported him to the police on 2 separate occasions. He was also a coke addict who ran with a biker gang, and he had once penned a confession to chopping up bodies for the mob. He was one of those people that was repeatedly calling Susan in the weeks before she disappeared. Though she was afraid of him, Susan allegedly had gone back to doing drugs and sleeping with this Billy Walker again. Her ex said that she just couldn't get away from him. Susan knew mobsters at the Newark strip club where she danced, and her scheme was to expose Walker as a rat and blackmail the gangsters into taking him out. Her ex said, "I told her, don't do it. They might kill Billy, but they will kill you too." He said she didn't listen. As of 2001, the police reached the conclusion that Susan did meet with foul play, and she is considered a homicide victim. Now the police believe the persons of interest are Mark Walsh, her ex-husband, Christian Peppo, her live-in boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, as well as Billy Walker, a man who had been reported to police for stalking Susan.